Got the big recording. So
Sorry, almost forgot.
no worries, no worries. So I have been at PM Group for about 3 years. I've been an architect, I'll say a licensed architect for probably about 7 years, 6, 7 years. But I've been in the industry since I came out of school back in 2005, was when I graduated from college. So my alma mater was Milwaukee. And then I happened to work for a company based in Madison that gave me the opportunity to transition to the West Coast. And they had focused in a number of science and technology types of projects. And I was there for about 13 years, and then I transitioned now to PM Group, and have kind of bridged, I'll say, the gap between originally architecture and now architecture and engineering. So my company is a global company, headquartered back in Ireland, and focus in high types of science and technology projects. So we're about 3,500 people, and so a very large organization compared to the previous company. So
Yeah.
but I think, you kind of asked a question about how I kind of came to this point. I knew architecture was kind of for me from the beginning, as you know, Katrina, and I kind of led myself to enjoying things like Legos, understanding, built things, making things. Always, in high school was doing engineering courses and taking those types of things, doing CAD at the time, and it just kind of made sense. I actually went to Platteville at first because they had a kind of construction and simple architecture programs, and then ended up transitioning or transferring to UW Milwaukee, where I was able to work my way through architecture school and graduate through there. So I never really expected to be doing the type of work that I'm doing now, which is life science and working on facilities around the world that are trying to develop medications and pharmaceutical drugs to support things like Parkinson's and cancer, different types of cancers, different types of medical devices, things of that nature. So coming out of school, actually, I worked for for the first 6 months, I kind of worked for a company in Europe, which is in Vienna. And I worked on two buildings, one for the European Central Bank, and I worked for a very large BMW facility, a delivery facility in Germany. So had an opportunity to really get into starchitecture, as I'll say, because that's kind of what that company was. They do competition work, and after that, I ended up getting an opportunity to work for Flat Architects, and that's based in Madison, and that kind of started my path towards life science. So
That is so exciting. I actually didn't know your career path. I mean, cousins don't really ask cousins those questions, right? But that's so cool because, yeah, I have so many students with so many various interests, right? Some of them love landscape architecture, and there's just so many facets of the built environment. So
absolutely.
Do you mind just speaking a little bit about how building design, like why that matters in a space such as like you were describing, like these science spaces? Is that different from other kind of facilities of that maybe size and scale?
Yeah, I'd say, the projects that we do can range from small modifications all the way up to, I think the largest facility I've worked on is about 1.5 million square feet, which is a facility that basically will house about 1,600 people, that are creating, pharmaceutical drugs. I actually did work for a little bit of time on a there's a company called Salesforce. People may have may not heard of them, but before I kind of went down this route, I did have an opportunity for a little bit to work on a headquarters project for them, where they had probably 15,000 people that were going to be on that campus. So, I think ultimately there's so many, like you said, facets and opportunities within the architectural realm to really kind of dive into. um, I'd say it really kind of comes down to what aspects of architecture kind of resonate with you, right? And so for me, I always felt when I was walking through a space, a garden, a building, a city, like old cities in Europe or in Asia, or things of that nature. You see things in a different way. You look at details. You look at how things kind of came to be, layers upon layers of stories, right? And so that
Yeah.
kind of, for me, is what kind of ultimately brought me to the build side. And it just happened. I never expected to be in life science. Like I said, I back in college, I was doing very fanciful things that you never thought would ever get built. I mean, there are companies that do that, but I never expected to get the opportunity that I did, and it kind of transitioned me in that realm. So now I help people in a hopefully in a different way. So
Yeah, that is fascinating. And I would assume, I'll skip to number 3 question, but it has to do with it. You clearly have an area of specialty. Is that something that's really aligned with your values? Do you feel like you get to kind of synthesize interests of varying natures because of that? Or is it just maybe an interest that emerged because of the opportunity?
yeah, it was definitely the latter. I mean, I've done a number of types of facilities throughout my career. As of late, it's been even more focused
Oh,
in different types of subject matters. But I am considered in my industry an expert. I was brought on to PM Group to start a group, an architectural group, which I have done. But at the same time, my passion is in trying to work through, I'll say, the puzzle that is a program, right? So a client will give you a requirement, and your responsibility is to basically pull out what you need from that, and ultimately create a building, right? And so
yeah.
there's different steps along the way to do those things. But um, not many people have that kind of whereabouts to make all those connections, and understanding everything that goes into strategic planning, looking at the facility, understanding the building codes, the constructability of a
Yeah.
building, and be able to take all the pieces that you need and formulate them into a concept plan that then at that point I tend to give it off to other people on my team. But I've been able to do that in the past, and
Yeah.
my interest and my passion is more on the front end. And like I said, that kind of fitting together the puzzle pieces that often become a challenge.
Wow, awesome. Thank you for speaking to the just variety of skills that you have and have been able to utilize in your job. What would you recommend as for up and coming architects or folks interested in getting into this very competitive kind of field? What kind of skills are required or best used?
Sure. So there's a number of them across the profession. So I'd say for anybody that's getting into architecture, I mean, art is in the name, right? So
Yeah.
um, I'm not as great as some of my colleagues and things like that, but sketching is always critical. So draw as much as you can, be able to, they're the quickest and easiest way to basically conceptualize something, or to portray your ideas back to a colleague, a friend, a mentor, mentee, or more important, the client. So that's kind of critical. But
Yeah.
now we're seeing, it's an extremely exciting time in architecture to be part of this, because you're starting to see things like Grasshopper. You're starting to see these different types of programs that really kind of utilize artificial intelligence, that you can basically create variables to a building that, or to a design using a program that allow you to get the most optimization out of something, whether it be the facade of the building, so that wind that's coming off here in the Bay Area, wind that's actually coming through does not actually affect other components around the building. You may have been in downtown Chicago, where, you hear these things like wind tunnels, right? So, the wind kind of, goes around the building and then forces a vortex of windiness at the base. You can, with design and with programs, you can actually develop facades that, minimize that. So,
oh, wow.
Yeah, so there's also, we utilize heavily, many of your students may have heard Revit. So,
yeah.
or BIM is what the actual industry calls it. So building information modeling, where a lot of information could be put into a model, as opposed to CAD, where it was very kind of one-dimensional. So there's a number of those opportunities. We, on the construction side, we use, well, even before, we use virtual reality, and on the construction side, we use augmented reality, right? So we use things like HoloLenses that Microsoft has, and the likes of those, where we can basically have a headset that is transparent but has the ability to project that Revit model or that BIM model directly in space, so you can actually see what the building will look like as you're walking around, whether the building is not built, whether the building is, maybe the structure is up, and you can walk in and see what the mechanical systems will be, what the utility systems will be. So walls, doors, things like that. So
that is unreal. How cool. Yeah.
And then you've got the biggest thing, which I think is really advanced. It's a gift and a curse, but of course, the ability to utilize 3D printers and things of that nature. Coming through college, I didn't have any of that really. And everything was, model making was all by ourselves. And I think it was the year I graduated, the school had gotten a laser cutter and a model maker, and, doing crits the following, couple of years. It was like everybody was hell bent on using laser cutters and model makers. And so it's always good to be able to get the tactile aspect of doing, your own models, and doing it without necessarily the help of a machine. So,
well, thank you for that endorsement, because they're hard at work on their 3D models right now, and it's good to hear it from an expert. Before I open it up to the class for questions, I'd love if you could share any past, current, or notable projects, any visuals you'd like to share, or any other insights that we didn't touch on yet.
Yeah, I'll just show you the kind of the 4 slides I put together.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate it.
So these were kind of some of the, things that you can expect when you get into college, right? So as I mentioned, drawing parties, these were things that were all based off of college, drawing classes and things that were supported, or, as a university course, or things that were, also just a bunch of architects getting together and drawing in a space, right? So that's critical. This is what you would typically see in a studio. This is the first year studio at UW Milwaukee. So you have a huge hall of, I think it was like probably somewhere around 50, 60 people. So you get to know your fellow classmates quite well, because you're working kind of night and day. It isn't for the faint of heart. The one school that the lights were always on was architecture. So this was a competition that is kind of the architecture school, where the first year you create a chair. And then this is kind of a standard kind of crit session, where you get up and you kind of express and defend your design to different types of professors and things of that nature. So after that, after school, these were two of the projects that I had worked on.
Wow.
In the left one is the European Central Bank that's in Frankfurt, Germany, and then the right one is the BMW Welt building in Munich, Germany. So those are two really exciting opportunities that I had, being able to do all kinds of really neat models for these things, models that were, I did a facade study for this project that was about, I think, 7 or 8 feet tall. So, really neat stuff. And then these were some of the models that were created by this company. And I'm sure some of the ones that I had done are hidden back in there, but really exciting opportunity. And then finally, these are some of the projects that I've had the opportunity to work on since moving into the life science or science and technology world. So I mentioned the Salesforce project. I've done a number of different projects for pharmaceutical companies. I worked on a really interesting technology project for Facebook, for those, and then a children's research institute where they focus on children's cancer. So those are some of the kind of notable projects that I've had the opportunity, the great pleasure to work on. So,
are you telling me Facebook has a secret medical lab?
It's not medical. It's technology based. Yeah. No, this
Gotcha.
was it's called Area 404. Actually, if you know the terminology of 404, if you get to a website that you don't know. So it was the one place that Mark Zuckerberg was not allowed to go because it was dangerous.
That is extraordinary. Thank you so much. I'd love to open it up to my students. If you have any questions for Andrew. Yes, Avery.
So you worked on the BMW museum?
Yeah.
In Munich?
Was that the BMW museum in Munich, you said?
It wasn't it was across the road from it. It was what's called a delivery center. So if people throughout the world have the ability to go to this location, there is a museum aspect in it, but it's not the actual museum.
Oh, okay, I see.
So people can go across the world, fly into Munich, pick up their BMW and drive it around Germany, and then bring it back, and then they'll ship it, to wherever.
Wow. Cool. Was that your question, Avery?
Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, Thane.
Does Area 44 have zombies?
Does Area 404 have zombies? Is the question.
I don't think so. I never saw any of them while I was there.
Well, not yet. We like growth mindset in this class. Yeah, Morgan.
What is the coursework like?
Yeah, question about the coursework in architecture school.
Yep, good question.
What can they expect? Yeah.
So usually in the beginning of the school year, you'll have, let's see, the first year you have a couple of lecture courses. They try and get you into doing, understanding about history of architecture, a little bit of understanding some of the newer kind of architecture that goes on as well, and then they balance that with general courses, and then you don't get into any kind of studio until I think Milwaukee was your second year. So, and then what happens at that point is you have studio with other courses. You try and get most of your generals out of the way. You still have a little bit of electives that you can take. And basically you have 2 semesters or 2 different studios. And at that point, you then submit a portfolio. And so based off of your work, you submit a portfolio to the school. And at that point, they select a certain number of students that will be able to move on within the school. So they basically kind of weed individuals out of the process, right? Because it is an extremely competitive but rewarding opportunity to get to that point. So, and then you also start to see intermixing of what I say higher, masters and PhD students kind of getting involved in your education at that point as well. So I think it was my 4th fourth year studio where I started doing international studios. So we had an opportunity to go to Turkey.
Yes, I remember that.
Do a studio where we were not there the whole time, but we were there for the first, I think it was 3 weeks or so.
Wow.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you. And is it a 4-year program?
Yeah, so Milwaukee is a 4-year undergraduate and a 2-year master's. The difference, what you see in architecture, some are 5 and 1, depending on where you go around the U.S. But more often than not, what we tend to see, or what we see, what we talk about in the education system, is that usually master's students are the ones that go back mainly because they want to teach. If you start going that process to master's and PhD, that's master's is usually you want to teach. PhD is a combination of teaching and research. You're really getting into, to some extent, a life of, looking at different, you take on one aspect and you just really dive into it.
Yeah. So, awesome. Yeah. Any more questions? Thank you, everybody who asked questions. I really appreciate it. And thank you so much, Andy.
My pleasure.
This is so rewarding for everybody. So thank you. Yeah.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah. Enjoy the rest of your break. I'll see you tomorrow.
Indeed.
Yes. Thank you so much.
Of
Bye.
course. Have a nice Thursday.